Hey, Winnie Pooh. You want to be on the video? Okay. Say hi. Focus check. All right. There we go. All right. Good job, Winston. Thank you for the focus check. What's up, you guys? Welcome to LFG Fishing TV. I am LakeForkGuy, and today we're doing something a little bit different. Never really done a video like this. Normally I do vlogs on Mondays, but the last vlog was, I felt like, so boring. I was just like, you know what? I'm gonna switch it up, do something different. So I hope you guys like this today. I asked you to send in your questions about pond fishing versus lake fishing. That's what we're talking about today. You guys gotta bear with me on this lens here. I got a brand new lens. I got a wide angle lens, finally. It's taken me this many years to finally get a wide angle lens for my DSLR. My other one, just shooting in indoor situations and close quarter situations, was just not good. So I finally broke down. I got a 14mm prime lens, and it's great for doing stuff like this. All these questions came from Instagram today. If you're not already following me on Instagram, make sure you go over there and follow LakeForkGuy. It's where I post a lot of the fish pics and the bait pics that I'm using and all kinds of interesting, fun videos and whatnots. And I'm ready. I'm ready to talk about fishing. I got my coffee. Got my big Cedar Lodge cup. Look at that right there. Table Rock Lake, my favorite lake currently to be at in the US. And so we're buckled down here, ready to go. Quack 'em and stack 'em. Do you have a better chance of catching a fish in a pond versus a lake? You know, I would have to say it really depends on where the lake is and where the pond is. Obviously there's a lot more fish in lakes because they're usually bigger, but they can also be more spread out as well. And you know, it depends on pressure. How much fishing pressure is the pond getting? How much fishing pressure is the lake getting? I found that it's usually easier to get a bite quicker in a pond, just because it's a smaller body of water that you can break down faster. So if you're not getting bit on the spinnerbait, you can switch up to a worm, or if you you're just paying attention to the water, seeing things going on. There's limited forage. There's not as many prey species as there is in lakes. You know, lakes are just more complicated, so it's just quicker to break down a pond versus a lake. And if the pond hasn't been fished in a long time, or it gets a little pressure, it's usually a little bit easier to catch them in there. Okay, Colby Miller 13 asked, what should you be looking for in ponds opposed to lakes? Ponds and lakes are really the same sort of thing, except one is smaller than the other. They both have cover and structure. One may be a little bit deeper than the other, but they're very similar. So you want to look for the same exact things. But what happens in ponds is, if there's not as much cover and structure in there, a lot of times you'll just get bass that they're holding on very small things. And I mean, it could be like a little frisbee that somebody flew into the water, or a grocery cart, or one rock that's out there. They just typically in ponds don't have as much cover. So when I'm pond fishing, I really like to look at what's around the bank, what is extending out into the water, and look for those little things. Because a lot of times, if they've got like a couple of rocks, or if there's one little weed patch out there, that's going to hold a good bass. And in lakes, you're really looking for copious amounts of cover and structure that are going to hold multiples of fish. So, you know, a brush pile, or you know, a whole stretch of good looking grass lines or reeds, or maybe there's a big rock pile. You know, you're fishing for groups of fish rather than really trying to target one particular piece of cover that's in a pond. Man, these are good questions, guys. Very good questions. Ost Walton 20 asked, when returning to fish a pond and it looks, do you change up the bait that usually works there, or fish with the bait you've had success? Okay, so it sounds like he usually fishes a pond and he's wondering, he's probably having some problems after the conditions have changed. I'm not getting bit on what I usually get bit on. What should I do? Absolutely experiment, guys. Experimenting is great, you know, anytime you go fishing, but especially when you're pond fishing and a lot of people fish there, I like to switch up colors and baits frequently. I mean, always have your standbys ready to go, but I usually, if I'm going there for the first time, or going there for you know, the first time in a while, I'll just start off with something different, and I'll keep that mainstay, you like the spinner bait, I'll keep that handy where I can throw it out. But you know, the conditions change constantly, so it's always good to have a fresh approach anytime you go to the lake. And if you're seeing something has changed, you know, as far as, you know, it's overcast conditions, or it just rained or something like that, don't be afraid to go ahead and switch it up and throw some different things. Go through the whole gamut of plastics, topwaters, crankbaits, spinner baits. Just keep switching it up till you figure it out. All right, Jack Ellerby asks, can there be a difference between structure in ponds and structure in lakes? You know, I want to say not particularly, no. But like I was saying before, usually you're targeting more specific cover that is in ponds versus lakes. You know, there's one little rock over here that's in a pond, or there's a whole stretch of good reeds right here in this lake. It's usually more like that. When you're talking about structure, and maybe we'll do a video on this one day, you know, let me know in the comments, structure versus cover. But structure is really the same, I think, for ponds and lakes. You know, structure is really a point, a roadbed, you know, large obstacles that fish will get around, rather than a particular bush or a rock, or things like that. So those things I think are the same in structure, but cover definitely look at differently. All right, so Quintilla DH asks, are crankbaits and swim baits like Rapala ones as effective as soft rubber baits? Man, that's an interesting question. You know, I would definitely say that in ponds, soft plastics are really effective, just because you're usually fishing on the bank, you've got a lot of obstacles around, things to navigate through, get the fish out of, and you don't have a boat to get your lure unsnagged if you throw it out in the middle of the lake and get hung. So soft plastics are great, they're effective, but it doesn't mean that hard baits aren't going to catch them in those ponds. Whenever you see fish swirling on bait in the pond, or you know, going to town on some bait fish, I mean, get you a hard bait out there, because it's an effective way to catch those fish. I would say definitely in lakes, I'm going to hard baits anytime I can. If I see actively feeding fish, whether it's on the electronics or at the surface, or just, you know, I see some swirling going on, I know the fish are feeding, I'm going to get out a hard bait, because it's a quick and easy way to get some bites and get some fish in the boat. And it's more effective if they're actively feeding than, you know, dragging something slow on the bottom. You're gonna miss out on those opportunities to really get some fish in the boat quick. Both are effective ways to fish, but in a pond versus a lake, you know, I'm definitely gonna jump towards a soft plastic first at a pond versus at a lake. Alright, Kinzer Guzman 3 asks, is there certain times of year that you prefer to fish ponds over lakes? And if there is, why? Actually, there is. There is a time in Texas where the water starts to look like my coffee I have here in my hand in our lakes. It usually happens around September, October. There's usually a week or two period where the water column starts to turn over, and I believe that is called dimictic mixing. So lakes that are dimictic, that means they separate, they have two layers. I think that's how it is. I'd have to check my biology notes. But you have monomictic, which is basically one mixed layer all the time, like ponds, and some lakes are like that too. And the farther north you go, like in Canada, where me and my dad did all that smallmouth fishing, they actually have 2 turnovers a year. They have fall and spring. But down in the South, we just have 1 turnover, happens in the fall, and when that happens, the lakes suck. It is hard to catch fish because the oxygen levels are all mixed up. Fish can be anywhere. It's just hard to catch them. They kind of get in this little depressed mode and they don't want to bite. So in that case, ponds, much easier, more consistent. Water's cleaner, the oxygen levels are more stable, and it's just easier to catch fish. So absolutely, I like to fish ponds more in the fall during that turnover period, and some in the spring too. I usually like to pick out a couple of ponds in the early spring and kind of clean clear water ponds and go, all right, are fish on beds yet? Because if it's close to a lake that I like to fish, it's a good bellwether for me. I can look at the pond and go, okay, all right, they're on ponds here, or they're on beds here, they're probably on beds in the lake. So that's usually a good tester for me. But yes, to answer your question, yes. Alrighty, last question right here. Jonathan Fisher, he asked, does fishing after rain help or hurt the fishing day? You know, that really depends on lakes versus ponds, because ponds are much smaller. It's much more sensitive to changing conditions. Like if you get a lot of rain, I mean, if you get a ton of rain, the dam could break, you know what I mean? Whereas a lake, you've got a much more stable situation where you can find cleaner water if you want to. So in a pond, much tougher to find clean water, and usually it gets really tough after it rains. I've had many great days though on lakes during the rain or right after rain, just because you can get in areas that have some cleaner water and there's some flow. There's some fresh water coming in, you know, flooded vegetation, bugs and stuff getting in that, and then bluegill feeding on that, and the whole process going down. So that's good. And then ponds, it's usually good, you know, a few days after, like after that water kind of, the mud subsides and the water gets a little cleaner. But right after rain in a pond, it can get really tough if it's muddy. If you missed the video I put up the other day about finding fish on your fish finder, I get a lot of questions on that. Had a few on the Instagram comments about that. Click here, make sure you go check that out. You know, I get that question all the time. So watch that video. You can see how I find fish in the summer, looking at electronics, what they look like on the graph, and looking at structure and cover and all that fun stuff. Winston's coming to close her out. Oh, beefcake. If Winston had a voice, I'm not sure what it would be like. It'd be like deep, I think. Hey bro, you wanna go fishing? I don't know. Alright guys, hey, thanks for watching. I had a lot of other questions on Instagram about, you know, other things. We're gonna do this more often. So make sure you're hitting the like button and let me know what you want to talk about next. What versus what? You know, smallmouth versus largemouth, spinning rods versus bait casting rods, whatever. Let's talk about it. Make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Got some really cool bass videos coming up. Got Stephanie gonna catch her PB bass of the year. Happened over the weekend. So make sure you're subscribed. Stay tuned for all that goodness, and I'll catch y'all next time. You kind of look like a largemouth. We got a big old bottom lip. Just hoot. Put a little Terminator skirt on it. Just made it a nice little compact bait for spinnerbait. This is which is straight Terminator spinnerbait. If you look right here, you can see that the blade hangs down much farther than the hook than